Hello and welcome to another exciting, episode of Mattanory. I've crossed the border into Kent. I've had all my jabs, so I should be okay and be able to get back safely. I'm not sure what colour zone Kent is in, but that's by the by. We're here in the sort of Medway area, so I've got a little story to tell, which I'll put together myself. I hope you can enjoy it. This is the story of Vortigen, Hengest, and the Medway megaliths. Very little is known about the 5th century warlord known as Vortigen. It's thought that he was an early king of the Britons and ruled just after the Romans left. Most sources suggest that he was not a particularly nice or honourable man, and most agree that he was a weak man of little character, possessing few redeeming personal qualities. Now, estimates of when Vortigen came into power in Britain, they vary quite dramatically. Most sources suggest it was possibly around 425, maybe a bit later. But he may have been given the title of High King rather than actually being the king. It's thought that Vortigen was not his name at all. It was more of a title meaning over king. But even his origins and how he came to power, origins of how he came to power are disputed. According to the available sources, it's hard to imagine that his ascent to power was by the acclamation of the British ruling council, and it's much easier to believe that he gained his throne by treachery and murder, and that's also much more interesting. The historian Geoffrey of Monmouth, in his 12th century History of the Kings of Britain, tell us of a King Constantine, who had 3 sons, Constans, Aurelius Ambrosius, and Uther Pendragon. They will come later into the story. Geoffrey wrote that Constantine was killed by a Pictish assassin, leaving the oldest son Constans as king. Now, seizing an opportunity, Vortigen managed to secure marriage to Severa, the daughter of Magnus Maximus, who is the predecessor of Constantine. And after this, he managed to be installed as the new king's advisor, as Constans was very young at the time. It is then believed that Vortigen had poor Constans killed and managed to seize the crown for himself. Constans' 2 brothers were too young at the time and not in a position to scupper his plans. However, Aurelius and Uther were bundled up and managed to escape to Brittany in the court of Boudicca I, their cousin, just in case Vortigen had plans for the 2 infants too. This is something that he would probably live to regret. And before long, Vortigen had successfully established himself as the main chieftain to whom other tribes paid allegiance. He called himself the King of the Britons, but this was not going to be an easy time for Vortigen or the country. The Saxon Chronicles state at the time of the year 449, Vortigen found he was having to fight 2 battles simultaneously, one in the north against the Picts and one in the south against the Saxons. Both tribes were attempting to claim these lands for themselves. It's thought that this would be an easy target since the fall of Rome, and all they wanted to do was exploit the land's natural resources and claim the lands to expand their territories. To help him to achieve his goal and to keep the throne, he hired some Jutes under the command of 2 brothers called Hengest or Hengist and Horsa to repel the Saxons, and they were at this time quite successful and managed to repel the Saxons' advance. The chronicles say, and they came to Britain in 3 long ships invited here by King Vortigen. Their war leaders killed and drove away the king's enemies. Now, there are conflicting stories here that state that Vortigen had offered payments of the lands and great wealth, but didn't follow through with this and broke his promise. Others say that Hengest and Horsa turned on the king in a bid to seize control of themselves as they wanted some more lands. So, in 455, they faced each other near here at the village of Alresford in Kent, which is about a mile that way. Some chronicles call it Epsford, but it's the same corruption of the name. Vortigen's armies, the British on one side and Hengest and Horsa on the other, the brothers had allied themselves with the Saxons, and they were ready. They turned on the king and the British, destroying through fire and sword's edge, according to the Saxon chronicles written later. Now, there's little in the way of records of what happened, and most were written much later, but the battle was fierce and there were many casualties. It's believed that Horsa and Vortigen's son, his second son, Vortigen, were both killed and were buried nearby. Nobody knows where the bodies of Horsa and Vortigen were buried, as well as all the other people that perished at that time in the local battle. But there are some local legends that indicated the existence. There was a folk belief that a black prince was buried within the chamber of the Cauldron Stones, which is also about 4 or 5 miles over there. In the 1946 paper called Notes on the Folklore and Legends Associated with the Medway Megaliths, the folklorists John H. Evans suggested that tales of battles taking place at this site and other Medway megaliths had not developed independently among the local population, but had percolated down from the theories of antiquities. They believed that the 5th century Battle of Aylesford, which was recorded in the 9th century Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, took place in the areas, and this is where a lot of the casualties were buried. Other tales suggest a different burial site, maybe right here, this site called Little Kits Coty, a Neolithic burial chamber. It is said that a battle once raged here and referred to the Battle of Kits Coty. This battle is also a legendary Celtic battle, Battle of the Woods. It's also a possibility that both as Kit or Kit are the same thing, and it's in fact as cat, a Celtic word for battle. This, of course, the first part of the name of Little or Lower Kits Coty House today, could be named after Vortigen. Maybe he's buried here, because some say that this place here is haunted by a ghostly reenactment of a battle that has taken place at some time or another. Another tradition is that on a full moon, if you place a personal object on the capstone and walk round the dolmen 3 times, after which the object will have disappeared. So here we are at Little Kits Coty or Lower Kits Coty House. It's sometimes called the Countless Stones because the stones can supposedly never be counted twice, so you get to the same amount. Not far from here there is a stone called the White Horse Stone, which was probably part of another burial chamber, and it's said to be the burial place of Horsa. After all, Horsa does translate from the Germanic horse or horse. So although Kits Coty House and the White Horse Stone are identified in local tradition as the burial places of Vortigen and Horsa, we must note that there's no evidence to support this, sadly. I'd like to think it's true, but these structures are the burial places that predate the battle, and for thousands of years before they were already being used. Long barrels similar to this and the one at Cauldron and Little Kits Coty House up the road here were constructed around 4000 to 3000 BC. So it's thought that only local tradition have become known as the burial places of Vortigen and Horsa. It's a good story though. Now what happened to Vortigen? Well, nothing is known really of the outcome of the battle. It was generally agreed that there was a truce held. Vortigen agreed to allow Hengest and his son Esk or Oisk to have lands in the southeast of England. Hengest quickly agreed and a peace treaty was signed. But before the ink was dry, Vortigen directed Hengest and Esk to a clause he had overlooked. "Ha!" he said triumphantly. "You foolish barbarian, your ignorance has cost you dear. For the area of the vellum you have just signed is exactly the same amount of area of land that you are allowed to keep. Now place it on the floor, for the circumference for which it surrounds is yours. Hope you enjoy your new territory, sir." Treacherous indeed, you may think. But not being undone by Vortigen, Hengest cleverly cut the vellum into a long, thin strip that, when laid out, covered such a large area that it was the circumference of what is now known as half the size of Kent. So fearing for his life and the new allegiances with the Saxons, Vortigen fled west and went to Wales. He tried to build a stronghold there, tried to build a castle, but it kept collapsing each night. Seeking out the assistance of a young magician called Medway Emrys, or Merlin for short, Merlin revealed that at night a mountain shook, that all the buildings collapsed because beneath it were buried 2 fighting dragons. One was white, representing the Saxons, and one was red, representing the Britons. The white one was winning, and afraid of such an omen, Vortigen fled again. Disillusioned with the failures of their king, the British rebelled and allied themselves with a certain Ambrosius Aurelius. He had now grown into a burly young man and took his place in the events of the times and led their struggle. Merlin handed over to him the mountain site where Vortigen had failed to build, and it became his fort of Dinas Emrys. Vortigen took refuge in the re-fortified hill fort called the Rivals in Hlen. But Ambrosius pursued him and drove him south to the sea to a wooden castle in the old hill fort of Little Dalwood above Gunnerrow. Here, the castle was miraculously struck by lightning and Vortigen burnt to death, and he was later built in a small chapel in Hlen. Ambrosius Aurelius was left to halt the Saxon advance and unite the kingdom, but sadly Ambrosius died with no heir of his own. Uther Pendragon, his brother, took the throne. Now he had a child known as Arthur, but that's another story altogether.